Genre: Expository text. Creating a nation. Taxes and protests. In 1765, King George III of Great Britain needed money to rule his empire. How could he raise it? With taxes. Parliament, the law-making branch of the British government, passed a new tax called the Stamp Act. Every piece of paper sold in the American colonies had to carry a special stamp. Want to buy a newspaper? Stamp. Pay the tax. To most colonists, the Stamp Act was unfair. The British had the right to choose representatives to speak for them in Parliament. The colonists had no such right. How could Parliament tax them if they had no voice in government? The colonists held protests against the Stamp Act. Consequently, it was repealed or canceled. But more taxes followed. Women protested a tax on cloth imported from Britain. How? They wove their own cloth at home. Before long, the situation grew worse. In 1770, British soldiers fired into a disorderly crowd in Boston. 5 colonists died. This tragedy is known as the Boston Massacre. By 1773, most taxes had been repealed or canceled except the one on tea. One night, colonists held a protest called the Boston Tea Party. Dressed in disguise, they slipped onto 3 British ships in Boston Harbor, and then they tossed the ship's cargo, tea, overboard. Boston Tea Party. Some colonists disguised themselves as Native Americans. Revolution begins. An angry King George punished the colonies by ordering the port of Boston closed and town meetings banned. Colonists called these harsh actions the Intolerable Acts. However, they could not agree on how to resolve the problems with Great Britain. Patriots wanted to fight for independence. Loyalists wanted peace with the king. Many colonists were undecided. Finally, colonists called for representatives from each colony to attend a convention. This important meeting, the First Continental Congress, took place in 1774 in Philadelphia. After discussion, the delegates decided to send a peace proposal to the king. Congress ended, but the trouble continued. In April 1775, there were rumors that the British were marching to Lexington and Concord, villages near Boston, to capture weapons that the Patriots had hidden there. The colonial militias were ready. Militias were groups of volunteers willing to fight. British troops attacked. The militias fired back. Surprisingly, the British retreated or went back. Now that war had begun, the Patriots called for a Second Continental Congress in May. Delegates made George Washington commander of the new Continental Army. Congress also sent another peace proposal to King George. As war continued, Congress formed committees to do important tasks. 5 delegates were chosen to write a Declaration of Independence. This committee gave the job to one of its members, Thomas Jefferson. Events of the American Revolution. 1765. Passage of Stamp Act. 1766. Repeal of Stamp Act. 1770. Boston Massacre. 1773, Boston Tea Party. 1774, the First Continental Congress. 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Start of the Second Continental Congress. 1776, Declaration of Independence. 1778, alliance with France. Independence declared. Jefferson knew he had to convince many colonists of the need for independence. As a result, he combined a variety of ideas to make his case. Individuals, he explained, had certain rights. These included life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments were created to protect those rights. Instead, King George had taken away colonists' rights and freedoms. Therefore, the colonies had to separate from Britain. Congress went on to debate Jefferson's points. As a result, his strong words against slavery were deleted. There were other compromises, too. But on July 4, 1776, Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. A nation was born. Washington's army fought on. Finally, in 1778, France joined the fight on America's side. This was a turning point. In 1781, British troops surrendered in the war's last major battle. That year, Congress approved the Articles of Confederation. This document outlined a government for the former colonies. The United States was created as a confederation or a union of separate states. The Articles gave the states, rather than a central government, the power to make most decisions. In 1783, King George finally recognized the nation's independence. By then, though, the United States government clearly wasn't working very well. The states often didn't agree with one another. The Revolution had ended. The work of shaping a government had just started. It would continue with a constitutional convention in 1787. 1781, last major battle of the war. Approval of the Articles of Confederation. 1783, King George recognizes independence of United States.